Welcome, gentle listener, I am Voldemort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the factions, forces, and war gear of the Warhammer 40k setting, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. A reminder that we have two other channels, GK Natural History, covering dinosaurs generally, and Living Mythology, presently covering the Greek myths. Links in the description. Give us a like and a share if you enjoyed the video, and if you enjoyed it more than usual, then we have a super thanks, so chuck me a coin if this is the case. Now, let us proceed. For today, finally, we are to discuss a model that epitomizes the entire faction. And quite honestly, it is the most famous, nay infamous, of all of its kind, both in the lore and on the tabletop. It is a rare thing indeed, for this luxurious model has not only fluff lore, but also crunch lore. Ah, a wonder indeed. We shall get onto those details after we have a basis of comparison. And so, as usual, for the very basics, let us lean on existing wisdom. To quote, Carnifexes. Carnifexes are living engines of destruction, towering monsters of unyielding armoured chitin and knotted alien musculature. They are one of the toughest and deadliest of all a Hive Fleet's warrior creatures, created to spearhead assaults in massed battles. Though the hive mind has since created larger warrior organisms, few are the Carnifexes equal in terms of size and strength, nor in terms of sheer destructive potential. The Imperium's first recorded Carnifex encounters occurred in the battles leading to Hive Fleet Behemoth's invasion of Macragge. As the great star vessels of mankind strove with the unearthly living ships of the Tyranids, Carnifexes were to be found at the head of many boarding actions, tearing their defenders apart with size-shaped talons and immolating the survivors with incandescent bolts of bioplasma. These creatures swiftly became known as Screamer Killers, named for the terrible ululating shriek that accompanied their bioplasma discharges. The Screamer Killer was long thought by the Magus biologists to be the only breed of Carnifex, but as the tyrannic wars grind on, many other iterations of this bioform have emerged to wreak horrifying carnage upon Imperial forces. A particularly notorious example is the much-feared Thornback. Created by the hive mind to excel as much at range as in the crush of melee, the Thornback can launch a volley of spines from its dorsal thorax plates with lethal force, and can wield an array of ranged bioweapons. Doubtless there are many more Carnifex strains that have yet to be encountered by the Imperium, each with their own horrifying method of slaughter. Even as the hive mind creates increasingly complex organisms to enable it to hunt and kill its prey, the Carnifex has remained the combat standard, a reliable and relatively simple bioform that can perform well in any form of frontline conflict. Unlike specialized organisms such as maleceptors and toxicrenes, which require extensive time and resources for the hive fleets to spawn, the Carnifex can be generated swiftly and in great numbers. It is a rare Tyranid assault that does not include at least one brood of these mighty creatures. This allows the hive fleets to create a force perfectly suited to overcome and destroy a prey world's defenders. Worse still, Carnifexes are protected by a reinforced exoskeleton that is at least as dense as ceramite. Combined with their massive bulk and unnatural vitality, Carnifexes can shrug off an obscene amount of firepower and endure horrendous wounds before succumbing to death. Though Carnifexes lack the swiftness of other creatures in the Tyranid swarm, they more than make up for it in sheer brute force. A Carnifex's thunderous charge starts slowly, steely sinews straining as the beast propels its improbable bulk to top speed, making the ground itself shake. Its heavy footfalls beat out a monstrous drumbeat of doom as it strides forth. As the beast reaches full speed, its prey scatters before it or is trampled to death. A charging Carnifex is likened to a living battering ram, for their immense bulk can crush any opponent that bars its way and smash through almost any obstacle. Indeed, only a hardened fortress wall or super heavy tank has any hope of surviving the impact and stalling the Carnifex's stampede. Sometimes, not even this provides sufficient, as a few surviving records from McCragg's polar fortress bear testament. The best way to survive a charging Carnifex is to be elsewhere when it arrives. And now let us discuss the variants of the Carnifex. The standard Carnifex bioform is classified by the Ordo Xenos as the Carnifex voratio. However, the forces of the Imperium have encountered 4 other major subspecies of Carnifex: the Carnifex vorantii, the Carnifex ululari, the Carnifex bilius, and the Carnifex arbilis. These are more commonly known, respectively, as the Thornback, the Carnifex vorantii. The Thornback Carnifex bears genetic enhancements that resemble large spikes or thorns, and are used to push through an enemy's lines. The Screamer Killer, being the Carnifex ululari. The Screamer Killer was the first type of Carnifex encountered by the military forces of the Imperium. It is known for emitting a piercing shriek before shooting bioplasma. The Bile Beast, or the Carnifex bilius. The Bile Beast spews acidic fluids onto its foes before attacking in close combat using its huge crab-like claws. The Stone Crusher, or Carnifex arbilis. The Stone Crusher is a variant of the Carnifex intended for use as a siege unit against fortified targets. It is armed with huge wrecking claws capable of tearing down the thickest of fortifications, a heavier version of a scything tail and battering rams, used for crashing into enemy ranks and fortresses. Other sightings of this creature have been seen with a large wrecking ball-looking symbiote. End quote. Now onto the lore breakdown, for the description, as usual, does not paint the entire picture. Not nearly. As always, the Codex is merely the beginning of the journey. Gorgeous. For the Carnifex has a very simple role, and is part of armies of every single hive fleet thus recorded. Now it is clear that the Carnifex is a thing of brute power and carnage, but it is also near immune to the weaponry of most, unless concentrated down by a vast number of warriors, or specialist firepower is used. They keep moving forward. For the Carnifex is the equivalent of a tank in the bio-armaments of the Great Devourer. A simple thing at start, it has now developed multiple patterns over time, as we have heard. Much like the Lehman Russ battle tank, in my opinion only, of course. Now many will balk and state that tanks are merely armoured bodies carrying big guns, but this is also true of the Carnifex, if we merely flip the script. For those guns are the sinews that bring down the huge scything talons and crushing claws. Yet, the Carnifex can also be arrayed with long-range weapons of war, exactly like the standard pattern and conception of a tank. For they can wield the heavy venom cannon, whose blasts can destroy armoured vehicles and easily annihilate power-armoured infantry. Or the dreaded Stranglethorn cannon, the odd weapon that can be just as deadly, as it pins men in place so they cannot escape the forces of the hives, or the Carnifex themselves, as they charge their victims. And like an Imperial tank, they can be set up, can be born by the Norn Queens to have a close-quarters array of firepower. The Death Spitter with slime and maggots, the Devourer with brain-leech worms, each as grisly as they sound, spine banks to fire darts that slay at a touch, or simply a vomited assault of bioplasma, blurted out into those within range. And the Carnifex hits like a ton when it does get to melee range. Its aforementioned talons and claws are not all it has. Despite that a Carnifex's assaults with either of these appendages can pierce even the armour of a Land Raider or Bane Blade. They also have bone mace options that can be used like an ancient dinosaur would, whirling in place and slamming its back-tailed club into anything that might resist its claws or teeth, or talons. Hitting with a force that can shatter walls, bring down buildings. And like the Lehman Russ, it can be adapted even further, so much so that a Carnifex from one hive with a different loadout can be a totally different threat and intensity of said threat. They can gain acid mores, meaning that their very spittle is so corrosive that none can survive its kiss. Adrenal glands that can accelerate its metabolism and give it boosts of speed that are terrifying in something so large. Chitin thorns, which snag flesh as they cut through with their talons. Enhanced senses, to make them more accurate, more aware, and thus even more dangerous. Spore cysts, which cloud and choke the air around it, making fire resolutions more difficult. Toxin sacs, that make each strike from it also a duel with the biological ramifications of a total overload of the resistance systems in any that attempt to remain alive. And even the most skilled warrior can be laid low by illness. Or they can have tusks for additional ramming attack power. Their armoured exoskeleton makes them proof for most weaponry, as stated, and even when one is slain, even as its blood soaks the ground, there is also a high chance that in its death throes it will thrash and scream and lash out at everything and anything in its orbit and range. A last act of spite before its body gives up. And many a hero or even entire squad of guard or marines has been wiped out by taking these creatures lightly in their last moments. While their brains and entire heads have been vaporized, there seems no chance that it will still be a danger. But this is a chance, a reaction, that has no conscious or even instinctive thought. It is a natural reaction that rips through its flesh without any instruction. Hence this is a vital, deadly and terrifying being. A one-stop shop for the hives, where there is more resistance than a few marauders, or a low-tech world without the ability to resist. For the hives do not think in makes, models, units and specialities. It is all just biomass to them. If the hive believes that unleashing a few trillion hormigons onto the surface of the planet will do the trick, then that is exactly what they will do. But if there is resistance, if there are bastilles, hardpoints, tanks, heavy weaponry and organized armies, then the Norn queens of the Splinter Force may just as easily send down a few 100,000 Carnifexes. It is all the same to them. There are no costs to it for larger or smaller units, no templates it needs to use, no unguents and holy incenses to be burnt to rouse a machine spirit, no training time required, and no need for supply lines. The Tyranids will simply generate exactly what they need as the attack on the planet continues. And it is this, the adaptability of the Tyranids, that is the most difficult thing to master and to battle against. For the Carnifex one meets today may be subtly or even entirely different to the next set you face. The worst situation, of course, is a brood of different fexes, and they usually are crept toward the enemy lines amidst the huge throngs of the minor beasts, the termagants and gene stealers, etc., etc. Now most will think that only fools would not be able to see the onset of such huge monsters, even amongst the masses. But this is not so. For the Tyranids do not march into battle in pretty lines and columns, with banners unfurled and trumpets blazing. They come on like an avalanche of chitinous woe, rushing and jumping over each other in their zeal to get to the fray, to sink their teeth into the fenders and rend them apart. So it is more difficult to predict, and nearly impossible to see into the midst of a Tyranid attack. There is aerial scouting, of course, but that is often negated by the harpies and gargoyles that usually fill the skies during any major engagement. Unlikely for the pilots to be able to see or take true stock of the swarms on the ground when they are dodging blast and suicidal collisions from the flying bugs that are willing to sacrifice themselves to take any plane or shuttle out of the skies. And they now even have what seems to be a leader bug variant of this form, Old One-Eye. But go to his video to be fully enlightened on that strange beast. Now the Carnifex is no longer the largest of the High Fleet armies. As they have come up against increased resistance in the galaxy, they have developed new forms that now dwarf the Carnifex. But for a long time, these horrors were the main large-scale monster of the High Fleets. Yet, even now, they are still some of the most dangerous to permit to hit your lines. For their size alone carries the day. Bowling into vehicles, walls or squads, they cause carnage and confusion on such a scale that it is almost impossible to know what else is happening on a battlefield when they are involved. For they draw all eyes, all fire, all troops and attention to themselves. And here's the perfect place to end the lore of the setting, and to discuss the lore of the battlefield, of the game itself. For here we discuss the legendary Distract-a-fex. The Distract-a-fex, the name of a tactic used by most forces when called for, when needed. The basics are very easy to understand, but the timing, the art, can take a lifetime to master. For, as with nearly everything, the devil is in the detail. In essence, the Distract-a-fex is any large lumbering threat that simply cannot be ignored. To place a Carnifex on the board at certain points in the game has always been a declaration of intent. I will ignore your little people and slam this huge hulking monster into your back ranks and tear literally everything to pieces. Thus, the opposing player is forced to direct the majority of their fire into the Carnifex to stop it doing precisely that. But all the while, he or she is firing on the Carnifex, your Gene Stealers, Hormagaunts and Termagants are rushing forward, ready to spring the actual trap, the actual attack. It is like getting the largest, dumbest person in an adventuring group to carry the most obviously dangerous weapon. They will draw all fire away from you and the real threats. Now I use this tactic myself quite a lot. When playing the most I have in a decade, during the height of 8th edition, my main army was the Eldar. Hence, I would get myself a unit of Wraith Guard or Wraith Blades, an overstacked one, 10 usually, and put them into Deep Strike Reserve. Then bring them out into the middle of the board as close to the opponent's lines as possible. My playmate could thus not ignore them. Yet, he could not take them out easily. And so, when it worked, when the player across from me did fall for it, and fired everything they had at my unit of Wraiths, all the while I would be dissecting them with my own firepower from across the board. All the while safe from counter-fire, as it was all being dumped into that oh-so-tough unit mid-board. I grabbed locations, took out key enemy units, annihilated their rank and file, then merely mopped up at the end. The caddish glee one can feel when your opponent finally takes your Distract-a-fex, Ari my Wraith, from the board, only to then calm down from their fist pumping in the air and clapping themselves on the back for such a great kill. And only then do they finally look around the board and see that I have encompassed their doom. Their men are beaten and bloodied. my army, apart from the Distract-a-fex, is all but untouched. That dawning realization of how badly they have been led by the nose around the board. It is also the preferred tactic of many of my opponents down my local club, and when tired after a long day of editing or writing, even I have fallen for this ruse. The target that simply cannot be ignored. Yet, when one balances the scales, the damage they could have done to you is far less than the firepower and resources you have expended to destroy it. And, due to the legend of the Carnifex, this is what this wee maneuver is called: the deployment of a distractifex. That large monster that draws not just all the fire, but all the attention from the enemy. Hilarious when an old ghoul like myself finally twigs what is happening. And then, one only has two choices. You scowl and sneer and complain that you have been foxed, or you do what you should, which is throw back your head, laugh with your deepest belly laugh, and shake with mirth as you realize you have fallen into the oldest trick in the book. Because you attacked what the enemy wanted you to attack, and you ignored what your enemy wanted you to ignore. So always try to defeat the scowl, and always try to see the skill of your opponent in their wiles, for it is, after all, a game. It is meant to relax and entertain you, and there are few things funnier than being tricked when it does not have any negative outcome. And some might say that a loss in the game is a negative outcome, but I say thee nay, nay, and thrice nay. Reframe it, for if you do not take the occasional L, then how will you be able to go on that most holy and amazing of things, the Rawengi killing spree? So, when you eat the dust, do not lay in it. Get up, brush yourself off, and dramatically lament and swear by the Emperor or the Dark Gods or the Greater Good or the Avatar of Cain that you will have revenge. And then offer your hand to the better player of the day and ask them for a rematch at your first mutual convenience. And I can tell you one thing. The thought of that rematch, the plots, plans, schemes, lists, and units you will be involved in, will transport you away from your stress, as you rub your hands together and plan your sweet, sweet retaliation. And that, my friends, is what it is all about. Fun and escapism. Psst. If someone puts out an obvious distract-a-fex, just ignore it. No, honestly, just ignore it. Feed them cheap units that will hold them up and take out the forces he actually wants to win with. And this can cause the same paroxysms of rage as falling for the ruse in the first place. The distractifex denied. And that, too, is awesome fun to perform. Thank you for your precious time. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.